All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Demons in the Details. This is the LR edition. Thanks for stopping by on a Saturday. We're going to play, I think, 5 LR questions today. The goal in this class is to make it easy to evaluate passages. That's the whole idea. Whether it's LR, RC, doesn't matter. Um, a, a question's difficulty is directly determined by how well we understand a passage. The question, the answers, they're all driven from the passage. However, if our passage understanding is at a level 1, we can't expect to tackle a level 5 question. So the goal is, how do we turn our passage understanding into level 5 so we can turn every question into a level 1? And the idea is how we read, right? I know everybody hears the term slow down to speed up, or, you need to slow down, read more carefully. Well, what exactly does that mean, right? Oftentimes, the way humans read, we're going to either typically scan, looking for keywords. And that's why people that are looking for conclusion keywords often get tripped up, because the LSAT knows that you're scanning, and it will intentionally it'll put the keyword indicator in front of the intermediate conclusion and not in front of the main conclusion, and then we'll miss it, right? So scanning definitely doesn't help. Skimming is the next level, and that gives us the gist of something. Oftentimes in school, undergrad especially, we'll skim things. We're reading articles, we'll kind of skim the headline, try to get the big, the overview. The problem with that is this is legal work, right? I mean, we're going to be lawyers. We can't just skim documents. We have to actually know what's in them, and we have to be able to speak to the details. So when skimming doesn't work and we're not getting a full understanding, us as students, we think we're smart, right? So we really dig in and we start doing what's called extensive reading. But what extensive reading does is it oftentimes, has anybody experienced where you start at the top and you read like the first sentence, you get all the way down to the end of the paragraph or even the end of the passage in RC, and we're like, wait, what did the first sentence say? What were we talking about in the first paragraph again? And that's because extensive reading often is very passive. We think we're putting a lot more effort into understanding, and we are. We are understanding more of the big picture. We're understanding more of the abstract stuff. But oftentimes we're overloading our short-term memory and we're not retaining the details, right? We're not seeing the forest through the trees. And the law, and especially with the work we're going to be doing in law school and the work we're doing here on the LSAT, it requires intensive reading, which is different. That's the highest understanding level of reading, and that requires us to literally slow down at first, because it's going to take us longer to develop the skill set. But the skill itself is all about paying attention to every word, right? Not just kind of glancing at it or just getting the quick overview of it, but we want to actually understand what that word is doing in that sentence, right? Never leave a word behind. But then the idea is we don't want to move off from that sentence until we've had time to consider it and evaluate it and understand what we can prove from it. And when we do, we're now starting to extract more of the information from it. And then we're able to then move on to the next sentence, whether it's in an LR passage or an RC passage. And we're now able to do the same thing to that sentence. But then now we're able to say, okay, wait a minute. How do these things combine to change what I know? Right? And oftentimes, what you're going to find, especially in LR, is why it's such a great place to practice it. You're going to get to the end of the first 2 sentences and you're going to like, wait a minute, all this proves is this one thing. And then you're going to move on to that third sentence and then it's a conclusion. And you're like, whoa, wait, how are you getting from here to over here? Right? And that's where we're able to start spotting the differences between an incomplete argument or a flawed argument, or we're able to then start identifying the necessary assumptions authors are making. We're able to see the gaps in the argument. It's incredibly difficult to read the whole passage at once and then to try to unpack everything. It's much easier on us, both on our short-term memories and on just our cognitive load that we're going to be putting on ourselves, to process and evaluate as we go instead of waiting to the end. Because if we wait to the end, I'm telling you, it's too late. All of us at some point, if you haven't, you will, you'll experience reading an entire paragraph or an entire passage And what in the world am I looking at? Right. And it's because there was some details that we missed earlier on. And so today, when we're going through, I want to make sure that we're taking our time, and I'm going to demonstrate how I do it. And it's just the way I do it. It's not the only way, but it worked for me. And I want to, hopefully, it'll help you guys as we go forward, right? And the first questions I'm asking myself when I'm reading these passages is, okay, wait a minute, is this just evidence or an argument? Which one am I in right now, right? And initially, first sentence or two, you might not know, and that's okay. It's just, okay, well, this must just be evidence then. Well, what can I prove from this evidence? What does this mean, right? How does this evidence interact with each other and connect with each other? And then when we do realize we're in an argument, oh, well, hold on, time out. Is this argument flawed or incomplete? Meaning, is there something that the argument is the author's doing that is just wrong? Like they're confusing sufficient for necessary, or they're making a part to whole flaw, or they're, their correlation causation. Is there something that's just jumping out to us that's wrong, right? Because if there is, we're likely in a parallel flaw or a flaw question. But if we can't readily identify a flaw, then the argument's probably incomplete, right? And so what I like to do a little different than I think most teachers or most people approaching the LSAT is before I start attacking, I want to complete the argument in my head, right? I give the author the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're not an idiot, right? Maybe they actually know what they're talking about. I don't know. But if their conclusion is to be proven, they must be using some other evidence that's not on this page. What is that evidence, right? And oftentimes, when you just rephrase the argument back and go, wait, you think conclusion because evidence, you usually spot, like, well, you must be assuming this other thing is true. Otherwise, this whole argument falls apart. There's their necessary assumption. Sometimes there's more than one, but usually that's the necessary assumption right there. And then from there, we can then say, okay, well, if I want to weaken the argument, I just make that less likely to be true. If we want to strengthen it, I just make that connection more likely to be true. Sufficient assumption, well, I just find evidence that proves that necessary assumption, and boom, we prove the argument. You start to be able to really manipulate and target attack arguments when you really understand its totality. Is that making sense what I'm saying? Hopefully. Yeah. And again, it's just this is how I learned from the demon. It's the process that I used. It worked for me, so I'm hoping it'll work for you. I see it work with a lot of students. So hopefully that makes sense. So as we go through these questions, if there's some sort of connection that I'm making that doesn't make sense, or if there's something about what we're reading that doesn't make sense, make sure you raise your hand. Let's talk about it. I want to make sure that people are understanding, not only what we're doing, but how we're getting it done. So that way, my goal for every class is there's something that you can take away that's going to help you on your journey. And if we do that, then we win, right? Any questions before we jump in and get started? How are we doing so far? That was a lot. I tried to keep it under a few minutes, so. All right, so let me drop these in the chat here. We're going to get to these 5 today. So I'm going to kind of pick up the pace for us a little bit. And I do like to share my screen when we're doing LR, just so you guys can see, what I'm looking at. And but feel free to follow along on your screen there. Nope. All right. All right, you guys can all see? There we go. Cool. Let's jump in. So we are doing test 122, section 1, question 12. Poor nutrition is at the root of the violent behavior of many young offenders. Okay. That's got conclusion vibes written all over it for me because that's a very bold statement that my next follow-up would be like, well, what's your evidence for that? And they would have to respond with, well, because, and everything after because is evidence, right? So that's really striking me I don't know for sure, but as I read things like that, I'm really like, I think that's I think that that's a, conclusion, but we'll see. So, poor nutrition is at the root of the violent behavior of many young offenders. Yeah, why? Well, because researchers observed that in a certain institution, so a institution for young offenders, so just one, the violent inmates among them consistently chose from the food available what was the food that was available for them to choose. Those items that were low in nutrients, was that all the food that was available for them? I don't know. Is that why they chose it? I don't know. In a subsequent experiment, oh, so that was an experiment? Okay. In a subsequent experiment, some of the violent inmates were placed on on a diet high in nutrients. Okay, so we have this other experiment that at least one, that's all some means, at least one inmate, a violent inmate, likely more, but some, at least one, was placed on a high nutrient diet. So I think we're probably going to say something like, and they improved their behavior, therefore that's why. There was a steady there was a steady improvement in their behavior over the 4 months of the experiment. What happened after? These results confirm the link between poor nutrition and violent behavior. Okay, so again, I always repeat every argument back every time just to get clear. So hold on, author. The author believes poor nutrition causes violent behavior in youthful violent offenders because violent inmates chose low nutrient food, and when some were put on a high nutrient diet, their behavior improved. So you're assuming, so right away, the author, it doesn't seem, even though there's like a correlation, causation there, it's not jumping out to me like they're really trying to hammer it's more than just correlation. So there is a correlation, causation undertone, but it's not jumping out as flawed to me. It's just jumping out to me as incomplete, right? And so right away, I'm thinking, okay, the author's assuming that nothing else, maybe like counseling or, you know, any other behavior mitigation techniques or anything like that. Nothing else other than the food caused the behavior improvement, right? So they're automatically eliminating everything else. So the only better nutrition, right? Not some other difference explains this improvement. So right away, that's jumping out to me as they have to be believing that, otherwise this whole argument falls apart. And they're jumping from the correlation, but they're making a confirmed causal link and they're trying to stack evidence. But again, this isn't addressing whether or not the improvement could have come from some other factor. So that's what I'm thinking. Let's see what they want us to do with it. Which of the following two most strengthens the argument? So, okay, I'm looking for something that increases the likelihood the necessary assumption is true. I want some evidence that says something like, hey, the only difference between the two groups was the food. There was no other behavioral modification. There was no circumstance changes. There was nothing was different. Like they didn't get a new cellmate. No, I mean nothing. Everything was equal. The only difference was the food. That wouldn't prove it, but that would strengthen the idea. Um, maybe maybe the violent inmates who didn't get a better diet didn't improve. Uh, so we could do some deductive reasoning there. Maybe there's something that they have evidence for that rules out other factors somehow. That's kind of more like the first one, like the only thing different is the diet. But if we can find evidence that speaks to those things, that's going to make it more likely that the necessary assumption is true. Nothing but the diet is the cause. And that would strengthen the argument, right? You guys follow where I'm getting this, how I'm going about structuring this? Is that making sense so far? Any questions before we jump in here? We good? Okay, cool. A. Some of the I don't care. At least one of the violent inmates who took part in the experiment had committed a large number of violent crimes. Okay. How did nutrition help? This is irrelevant. B. Dietary changes are easier and cheaper to implement than any other type of. I don't care. This is about cost and ease of implementation. This is irrelevant. C. Many young offenders, yeah, how many, have reported that they had consumed a low nutrient food sometime days before they committed violent crime? Okay, so, and this just adds more correlation, right? This isn't saying like, hey, our evidence is already showing us that there's a correlation. This isn't helpful. Just saying, hey, I ate a candy bar and then I did something violent isn't it doesn't support. It says many. Well, so you're telling me that, see, this is interesting when you look at C. I bet you people pick this sometimes. Many young offenders have reported that they had consumed low nutrient food sometime in the days before they committed a violent crime. Oh, so many didn't report that? Not only does it say many did, but it also admits that many didn't, right? So if anybody thinks that many doing this thing is a powerful strengthener, well, what about the fact that many didn't do this thing? And then, oh, which many is bigger? We don't know, right? So oftentimes when we're reading these answers, they don't say what we think. That doesn't say most. It says many, and many just means more than one. But we don't, okay, two people reported out of how many? 1,000? Like who knows, right? So this answers like this require so many more assumptions to be made, and it requires so much more evidence to be true that we don't know, right? And these are the type of answers that we often talk ourselves into. But if we're approaching these answers looking for why they're wrong, then it'll stick out to you like you you just admitted that many don't do this thing, right? D, a further study investigated young offenders who chose a high nutrient diet on their own and found many of them were nonviolent. Okay, so you're adding more correlation. Are they nonviolent because of the food, though? Was it a change in diet that caused them to be, right? This is just saying, hey, these group of nonviolent kids chose good food. Okay, but again, our argument is trying to prove that the dietary change was the cause in behavior, a change in behavior, right? That doesn't help us. So E, the violent inmates, the violent inmates in the institution who were not placed on a nutrient diet did not show an improvement in the behavior. Yep, boom. It's exactly what we were looking for. That is isolating the diet change and isolating the direct behavior. And they're saying, hey, the only people who changed were the people that did the diet, nothing else. And that is then going to the necessary assumption that nothing else is different. Nothing else is causing this change. That's supporting the idea, right? So we're gonna click that. We're gonna get our points here. Hey, we win. Awesome. What questions do we have? Any on this one? Marcus, you put that is the deductive reasoning piece. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just saying, hey, yeah, you're saying that it has to be this thing. It can't be anything else. So there it is. Parav, did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
That's a
So
beautiful name.
yeah, thank you. So on this one, on D, I rejected that. I mean, I did not pick D because it said further study. So do you think that's a good way to deduct any of the answers moment they go off track or go out of context? Further study to me kind of says that, okay, we are going outside of the context and then we are doing further research or study or talking about other things. And is that a good way of eliminating answer right away?
Just off that, I would say no because and I hate doing this. The question I struggle to answer the most is, well, what if D said this? Well, it didn't say that though, right? It said what it said. So I'm going to break that and say, yeah, but what if D said a further study investigated young offenders found that and they replicated the previous study with the only change being the diet. And they found that, so now we're having a strengthening in the results of the study. Now we're having or it could say a further study investigated, found that those who went on the diet of high thing, their violent offense their behavior started to decline, right? And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now we have two circumstantial evidence about diet, right? And that's why I think it's important to obviously not just assume what it's going to say, right? But there are some times, obviously, when you know what you're looking for, you can get rid of answers very fast. For example, um, I think if we look at what was it, A, you know, some of the violent inmates who took part in the experiment had committed a large number of violent crimes. Well, that's totally irrelevant. That's unhelpful. And I think it's important to always get rid of answers for contextual reasons. Like there's a reason why, and it's never just the presence of a word. It's what is that word doing contextually to the answer? How is that changing the flavor of the answer? Right? I'm looking for a spicy answer and there's no seasoning in this one. Well, that's wrong, right? So words are ingredients, right? And we want to know what they're doing in the answer. And if I'm looking for a clear cup of water and I see somebody dropped a rock in my water, I'm like, oh, I don't want that water. You're out. But it's for a reason I'm getting rid of it, right? Makes sense. Yeah. Great question though. Who's that? Marcus? Are you next?
Yes. So my question about D, because I did eliminate it, was when it talks about like that high nutrient diet, and I seen like from the first potential conclusion, poor nutrition, was that a good thought process to just automatically eliminate it based on the fact that it's talking about like I guess the opposite of what we're looking for, like the high nutrition?
No, because what if they said doing the high nutrition diet reduced violent behavior? That would support, right? What if they said that that's like what it did? That's not what D says. That's what they're trying to hope you get from D if you're just skimming it. That's the impression that the LSAC writer is hoping you take away from D, but that's not actually what D says. D says we don't know when the nonviolence happened. But if D was saying, well, obviously E couldn't be there because we can't have two right answers. But if D was saying, oh, a further study investigated violent inmates that when they went on the high thing, their behavior decreased, right? It was like, oh, well, that then goes to support the idea that the food is the cause of the of the thing. But then it says right here, just young offenders who chose a high nutrient diet. We're like, yeah, but were they violent offenders to begin with? We have no idea. And it just says and found many of them were nonviolent. Okay, were they nonviolent because they ate the food, or were they nonviolent before they ate the food? Because if they are, then that's not even the kids we're talking about, right? So, does that make sense?
No, that does, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. And remember, this is a strengthened question. And just like strengthened and weakened questions, a weakened question isn't a prove it wrong question. A weakened question is, but is that true though? That's all that is. And a strengthened question isn't a prove it question. That's a sufficient assumption question. A strengthened question, just like, yeah, I could see how this piece of evidence makes it more likely to be true that your conclusion is right. Right. That's it. And so we would want more evidence. So we are looking for evidence. So a further study presenting more evidence, right? Because what if E said a further study of violent inmates in the institution who were not placed on the nutrient diet did not show improvement in the behavior? Oh, it says the same thing in E, right? It's the same answer. And it's just a further study, you know? So yeah, this is why it's important to understand exactly what's being said. And if we're looking for shortcuts, again, can I get rid of it because of further study? That's a scanning question, right? It's as a scanning question. That's where we get tripped up. They're hoping that we scan. They're hoping that we skim. I mean, because those are automatic. They're gonna win. Those are easy wins for the LSAC writer because it's going to be incredibly difficult to get questions right if we're scanning and skimming. We have to read like attorneys. This is lawyer shit, right? We need to read like the attorneys we want to become, right? Jocelyn, yes, hello.
Hi, good afternoon. I had a quick question. When you initially read C, something that stuck out to me was that you said like, "Oh, this is just adding more correlation."
Hmm.
And then I kind of like saw that translate further into like our analysis of D. So when we're handling like correlation versus causation, like whether it be like a flaw question or a strengthening question or a weakening question, I thought that like you're supposed to like, strengthen the gap between like X causes Y or reverse it if it's a weaken. How does like a question answer that like strengthens or like adds to correlation? Like how does that not strengthen it? Like why does that not translate as additional evidence? Are we just looking for something more
Because
specific?
we're adding to the flaw, because correlation doesn't equal causation. That's the actual, like, that's why it's a flaw. And so if we add more correlation, but yet we're trying to prove causation, we're adding to the flaw, right? That's a great question. It's a beautiful question. And we got to remember the necessary assumption isn't a correlating effect. It's no, there's no other thing, right? That's causing. And what E is doing is supporting that. E is not supporting a two things go together, right? E is supporting there's no other thing that's different other than this food. And that's beyond correlation. That's something where the author, and that's why this isn't a flawed argument, is because the author is assuming beyond just, hey, these two things are the same, so one can cause the other. Oh, hold on, we don't know that. Just on its surface, we don't know that, right? But this argument's going beyond that, and they're doubling down and like, no, 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 this thing is specifically causing this thing. It's not the fact that it's just correlated. It's the fact that, hey, these people, the only and they're assuming this, they're not saying it, right? They're saying, hey, the only difference between these two is the diet. So it's got to be the diet. That's what they're assuming. And that's what E is strengthening that. E is not strengthening correlation. Hopefully I articulate that correctly.
That's awesome. I just feel like I had
Yeah.
my aha moment. I haven't had a lot of those lately, so
Beautiful.
I appreciate
I
that. Thank you.
win. Class over. I win. That's it. That's all I care about. That's it. So no, great job. Thank you for that. That's a beautiful question. Yeah, again, we don't want to add to the flaw, right? We don't want to add to the flaw. All right, so let's move on to what we do next one. All right. 122, section 2, question 15. The greater the number of people who regularly use a product, so they're going to give us some sort of, no, anyway, it doesn't matter. The greater number of the people who regularly use a product, the greater number whose health is potentially at risk due to that product. Okay, so that makes sense, but weird that we're talking about that. So, okay, so just the more people who use a product, the more people are at risk from getting any adverse health effects from using that product. Assuming there are health effects from using that product, though. But yeah, okay, I'm with you. More people generally use household maintenance products such as cleaning agents and lawn chemicals than regularly use prescription medicines. Oh, shit, here we go. All right, right away, and this is part of evaluation, right? You're thinking, what are you telling me? Why are you telling me? What are you going to tell me next? What? So what? Now what? That's constantly playing in my head when when I'm reading, right? Or when I'm talking to somebody. What exactly are you telling me? Why exactly are you telling me this? Like, what's your agenda? What are you hoping to accomplish? What do you want me to take away from this? That type of thing. Okay, well, what next? Like, what's my action item? Like, what do we do where do we go from here, right? And so right away, is anybody familiar with the IRAC structure that we're going to be using in law school? I don't know if you guys
Yes.
are, and whoever you are, then you'll start noticing this. Now, maybe you have already, but you'll notice the LSAT does this all the time. They use the RAC portion of IRAC all the time, right? We have a rule. IRAC stands for issue, rule, application, conclusion, right? And so we have a rule. The greater number of people who use a product, The greater number of those health is potentially at risk from using that product. That's the rule. Now we have an application of that rule. More people regularly use household maintenance products such as cleaning agents and lawn chemicals than regularly use prescription medicines. Next, the author is going to draw a conclusion from that application of the rule and probably conclude something stupid like, that's why we need to pay more attention to uh, you know household maintenance items than prescription drugs, right? It'll say something stupid like that because it's misapplying the rule at the top, right? It does this all the time, right? So we have the application. Hey, more people use household maintenance products. And remember, the more people use a thing, the more people who are at risk from the thing. And more people use maintenance products and cleaning agents and lawn chemicals than people who use prescription medicine. And my brain is, I'll tell you in a minute, my brain's thinking ahead to like, okay, what about the severity of the risk here? But hold on. Therefore, it is more important for such household products to be carefully tested to ensure their safety than it is for prescription medicines to be tested. So the authors believe in the household products got to be tested more carefully. It's more important for them than prescription drugs, just because more people use household products than prescription drugs. And the more you use something, the more people are at risk for the adverse effects. The author is the authors here is assuming that more people are at risk. That translates into it's more important. But they're completely neglecting severity of risk, right? What if household products, nothing we use, let's just live in a world for a second that using Windex doesn't kill me. Inappropriately using, tainted Windex with a little too much ammonia doesn't kill me, but taking this unregulated pill will, right? And harm is relative, like risk is relative. We don't have any evidence about the relativity of the risk, the severity of the risk, the type of risk. We don't have any of that, right? And that type of stuff should jump out to us if we're really evaluating what we're reading as we're going, right? And even here, I mean, we predicted the conclusion because we saw the rule, we saw the application, we saw the setup, right? We know we're getting set up. It's the LSAT. We know it's coming, right? So let's see what the question is. Which of the principal? Okay, cool. Principal. So we're going to switch teams here. We're going to jump on the author's train, right? And we're like, all right, author, let me come save you from your ridiculous argument. Which of the following principles is most valid justifies drawing the conclusion in the argument above? So we are looking for a principle that connects, hey, more people at risk equals a greater importance of testing, right? We need to justify neglecting severity, right? We need to justify something that comes in and says, hey, it's totally about volume of people, right? That's the risk we care about. So the more people at risk, the greater importance it is to test, right? And so that's going to be the type of principle that we're looking for. Is everybody following where I'm at? Any questions about that? No? All right, cool. All right, let's go. Whether or not it is important for a given product to be carefully tested depends mainly on the number of people who regularly use that product. Depends mainly doesn't get us there. Remember, this is a prove it question. We got to justify mainly. So what you're saying is there's other reasons for testing. Our argument is, hey, the greater number of risk, the more important it is. It's cut and dry. It's not taking into account nuance. It's like, no, volume of people equals risk. This gives us a backdoor out of that. Because somebody could argue, well, you said it depends mainly on, but not only on, right? So this is argumentative, not helpful. B, it is very important for any product that is regularly used. This is not helping us. I want to prove greater number of people at risk equals the more important, right? It is very important for any product that is regularly used by a large number of people to be carefully. Okay, sounds good, but that doesn't help us. C, the more people whose health might be at risk. So I wanted to say the more people whose health might be at risk, the more important it is, right? Might be at risk from the regular use of a particular product, the more important it is for that product to be tested here. This is it. This is what we want. It's exactly what we predicted. D, if one type of medicine must be taken more, I don't care. Irrelevant. E, it is generally more important. Again, generally, thanks. Don't care. Okay, C is the answer. What do we think? How are we doing? Good? All right. Oh, go submit. Yay, we win. Any questions on this one? This one pretty easy for you guys, or yeah? All right. I got a question here. It says for A, could you eliminate it based on whether or not it's important? Since the conclusion says that it's even more important. I don't know. I just eliminated it because, I mean, right away, whether or not something is important. If it said whether, again, here I'm doing it again. This is twice. You guys get me to do it twice. It's if it said whether or not something is important is based on how many people are using it, then this might be, if I think about it, might be a correct answer, but that's not what it says. It said whether or not it is important for a given product to be carefully tested depends mainly right there. I needed an absolute answer. This is not an absolute. The simple fact that it has a back door does not prove it does not justify the argument above. It doesn't justify the conclusion. And that's the mission. So the fact that it has a back door is all we need. And we hop right out. And that works on this question on that answer. It's not a one size fits all rule. It just worked on that particular question because that particular question had that particular answer had a back door built in, and the correct answer required surety, right? Because of that combination, we can get rid of A based on the back door, right? Alexi, yeah.
Hi. So just to clarify a point, when comparing how you evaluated a strengthened question to a sort of application of a principal question, the differentiating factor is that in a strengthened question, you're simply looking to make the argument more likely, whereas with the principal, you're sort of trying to guarantee or sort of definitively prove what the argument is setting out to do or saying out to sort of try to prove.
I think that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable observation. Again, I'm not a fan of hardline rules. I want to keep a back door open at all times, just in case, because I reserve the right to be wrong. But at the same time, the question told us that's what I'm doing first. And then I'll go down as needed. But that's my bar. I'm going into justify. It said justify, I'm going into justify. And if I can't, then I'll start to take it back a little bit, which means I might eliminate E or I might C. I might just get to it and go, no, you're not strong enough. And then I might have to back up a little bit once I realize, okay, I might be coming in too strong. But what I'm never coming in is too light. I'm always going in the answers heavy. I'm never coming in too light. I'm coming in with a ridiculously high bar, burden of proof they have to meet. And because I'm like, no, you're wrong. Because what I won't do is talk myself into a wrong answer. I will not do that, right? Because that's all I used to do, talk myself into every wrong answer I think possible. And that's the difference between somebody exploring answer choices, wondering if something could be right, and somebody that has a description of their suspect going, which one of you match, right? It's a much different approach, much different way of looking for things, right? It's a great question, though. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Rabani, hello.
Hi, I just joined, so sorry if you already went over this, but I had a
No
question
worries.
about
Welcome.
E. Thank you.
Yeah.
This kind of goes in great because you were saying like talking yourself like into wrong answer choices and wanting to avoid that. I read C and I was like, C is perfect, and then you get to E and it's like, yes, the it is generally, but then the unless was a little tempting.
But everything that comes after this, it is generally, oh, so sometimes it's not.
Gotcha. So that,
It was like whatever came after. Because remember, specifically in this question for this prediction, I'm looking for something with surety, right?
right,
Because the argument was sure. The argument didn't hedge. The argument wasn't, you know, hey, it's more preferable to do a thing. It was like, no, we need to do this because of that, right? Like the more
right.
people do, it was very sure and specific. So I went in looking for sure and specific because it matched what would correctly answer the context of what's going on in the passage. And this is where I'm telling you guys, I'll back up. This is why the level of understanding here is the key to unlocking anything on this side. It's all right here because my prediction, why I'm getting rid of an answer, how I'm reading it, it all based off of what I know to be true here. And then I'm going into here going 3 words in, oh, you're wrong. You can't help me. I don't care whatever else happens. And so guess what? I don't read the rest of it because contextually I know I can get rid of it. Well, is that another 10, 15 seconds I get back on the LSAT? Is that 10 to 15 seconds I can spend on another question later on in the section when I don't run out of time 10, 15 seconds too soon, right? And multiply that by how many questions I'm doing this on. Multiply that by how many answers in each question that I'm not having to fully sit and grapple with. Now start adding up not only the time savings and the efficiency savings, but the cognitive load savings. I'm even more fresh. This is section 2. I got 2 more sections to go, right? I need to be fresh for those too. Don't we all want to keep practicing PTs because we want to practice our stamina? Well, here's your stamina. I don't have to think about anything beyond it is generally because I spent my time thinking about this. And I know what I can prove. I know what I can't. I know what it means. I know what it doesn't. And then I know what could answer this. And I'm looking for that in here. And the minute it doesn't go, and remember, let's say it doesn't say generally, but let's say there's something else and I misread it. Well, that means I got rid of everything. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Let me go reevaluate real quick. And that's okay because the 1 or 2 times I might do that in a section is more than bought and paid for by the questions that I'm not sitting in debating between answers, right? This is what people in the, mid to upper 170s are doing. And people are like, how are they getting so fast? It's not because they're reading faster. It's actually they're reading slower. They're reading more intently here. The people who aren't scoring in the high 170s, they're the ones reading fast, right? So it's actually very counterintuitive, right? But when you start doing it, it just makes sense because as we're, what might take you a long time here to start unpacking, you get good at it, right? You just start, the better you get at it, the faster you get at it, right? And you just, you just can't, you can't not do it. Like even now with all the practice I've had, I can't not read it this way anymore. Like I couldn't speed read this if I wanted to. I would just stop and start. Wait. You just said this. What does that mean? You just said that. Wait. How does that go with that? It's just how we practice, and this is what works. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully,
Super helpful. Thank you.
great question. All right, we're rolling here. Are we rolling? We win, right? Yeah, we win. All right. Here? Yes. Go. All right. 124, section 2. Man, we're really killing 124 today, aren't we? Might as well just do the section. Question 16. An editorialist is chiming in. At least one person proposes that to raise revenues and encourage conservation, our country's taxes on oil, gasoline, and coal should be increased. So at least one person argues that increasing our taxes on oil, gasoline, and coal will raise revenues and encourage conservation. Okay. I'm with you. Maybe. Such a tax increase, however, would do more harm than good. Oh, why is that? There's a conclusion for you. Why is that? Well, because by raising energy costs, you're assuming raising taxes is going to raise energy costs, so we can't lower cost and raise taxes. I don't know, maybe. By raising energy costs, the tax increase would decrease our competitiveness with other countries. Oh, okay. Many families would be unfairly burdened with higher transportation costs, assuming that the higher taxes does translate to higher taxes. Okay, I see your connection. Finally, finally, so you give me a Thursday. Finally, by reducing the demand for energy, oh, you think that raising the taxes is going to decrease the competitiveness. It's going to burden family with higher transportation costs, and it's going to reduce the demand of energy because people aren't going to be able, for some reason, because the tax increase reduce the number of energy production jobs. All right, so here the author believes that the proposed energy tax would do more harm than good because it raises costs by hurting and it hurts competitiveness. It burdens families and reduces energy sector jobs through reduced consumption and people. Interesting here. I think the author assumes that the harms are outweighing the benefits without ever evaluating the positives. All we're given here, all we're given here is negatives, right? The author's assuming that job loss, cost increases, competitive issues, I don't know if they're the most important effects of the tax, but that's all it's talking about, right? It's just evaluating the negatives. None of the possible benefits are being considered. So the author must be assuming then that none of the possible benefits are strong enough to outweigh these harms, the specific ones that were listed. Okay. All right. What do you want me to do with that? Oh, okay. Each one which weaken, accept. Weaken, accept. We need to find an answer that's not going to weaken. Here's what's going to happen. Four of these answers are going to weaken the argument. They're likely going to weaken the argument by providing a benefit or detracting from the impact of these negative things. So a weakened answer, if we want to weaken this argument, remember the necessary assumption here is that, well, no positive benefits collectively outweigh these negative ones you're listing, right? That's the necessary assumption. So if I want to weaken that, I would have to bring benefits to the table that outweigh, or I would have to bring evidence that lessens the impact of these negative, that kind of mitigates these negative effects. Because again, I'm not proving them wrong. I'm just saying, hey, wait a minute. Maybe these bad things, they're true, but not to the degree that you think, right? They're not as impactful as you think. And so I would weaken the argument by attacking that necessary assumption. So I'm convinced that four of these answers are going to attack that necessary assumption somehow. One choice will either strengthen the argument or just be neutral, it just won't do anything, or it'll just be completely irrelevant. It'll just be like, hey, yeah, they don't raise taxes on Pluto. Yeah, okay, well, then that's my answer because that's totally irrelevant. It has no bearing on this argument, right? So I'm looking for four to get rid of four answers as I'm reading. Hey, do you weaken it? You do, you're out. And then the next one I'm asked, do you weaken it? No. Okay, then I think you're it because you're either neutral, you strengthen, and neutral, I'll throw irrelevant in there. You're just irrelevant. You do nothing to the argument, right? Does it make sense what I'm looking for? Right? So to be more precise, they're only pointing to the harmful consequences. So these wrong answers are going to like point to positive consequences, or they're going to undermine the harms somehow, right? They're going to mitigate the impact of the harms. Those would weaken, and I'm going to get rid of them, right? All right. The editorial's country's budget deficit will decrease if the energy tax increase is implemented, thus benefiting the economy. Yeah. We got a benefit. That undermines the conclusion. B, higher gasoline prices tend to lead to a cleaner environment because people do less non-essential driving. Okay, so we get a cleaner environment out of this. Well, that's a benefit. Okay. C, the proposed tax increase would be larger for some energy sources than for others. Uh, yeah, that's it. That does nothing. There's no benefit, there's no harm. You're just saying, yeah, that's it. I think that's it. It does nothing. It's just saying, hey, this tax increase is going to be larger for some than others. Yeah, who? I don't know. Uh, Okay, you do nothing. You're the winner. D, higher gasoline prices will encourage people to carpool, which will reduce individual transportation. Yeah, there's a benefit. E, the government would use the increase. Yeah, right. Whatever you're about to say. The government would use the increase in tax revenue to create many more jobs than would be lost. Oh, that just directly, that would be a great weekend answer. Like, hey, all those job loss you're worried about, actually, we're going to create more. So yeah, correct answer here is C. It does absolutely nothing, right? We see that? You guys probably got there faster than I did. It took me a minute. I don't know. There was something about it that I was having a challenge there for a second. It just wasn't clicking. I don't know. Something about it. I think I honestly misread it initially. But being larger for some, okay. Yeah. Anyway, that's our answer. What do we think? We're gonna win? Yeah, we win. Cool. Any questions on this one? Are we good? All right. We'll go to the next one then. Did that say monkeys? It did. 122, section 1, question 8. Vervet, vervet monkeys. Vervet monkeys use different alarm calls to warn each other of nearby predators, depending on whether the danger comes from the land or the air. Okay. That's it. Okay, so we're told that these monkeys, vervet monkeys, change their alarm calls depending on whether the predator comes from the land or the air. Why do they do that? I'm assuming they're probably gonna ask, why do we do that? I don't know. Maybe they gotta fight them differently. Maybe they gotta defend themselves differently. Why would they use different calls? Maybe it has to do with either they're gonna, they're either gonna fight them, they gotta defend themselves, or they gotta run away because they're predators. Maybe that changes their strategy. That's why they gotta call maybe they gotta call different people, like different monkeys. Like maybe they got like a hierarchy of monkey, like military, and it's like, oh, we got to call in the monkey Air Force, or we got to call in the monkey Marines, depending on who the predator is. I don't know. Where are we going with this? Which of the following two contributes to the most explanation? Okay, I'm going with there's a different strategy. They're calling in a different monkey military. I don't know. There's just a different strategy how they have to handle it. Maybe depending on whether they come from the air or the land changes how they have to fight, or changes how they have to escape, or changes how they have to defend themselves. I don't know. This is strange. Sorry, guys. I don't have a better prediction than that. I don't know where it wants to go. B, by varying the, or A, by varying the pitch of its alarm call, a vervet monkey can indicate the number of predators. That doesn't help. Okay, the number. They specifically said the land and the air. I don't see how that helps. How many? Yeah, we're saying, hey, they got one call for the land, one call for the air. That would assume that, yeah, that there's no way. B, different land-based predators are responsible for different numbers of vervet monkey deaths. Again, that doesn't change why they have to call differently. C, no predators that pose a danger to vervet monkeys can attack from both land and the air. Okay, but again, why do they need different calls? D, Vervet monkeys avoid land-based predators by climbing trees, but avoid predation from the air by diving into. Okay, yeah. That's the change of strategy. They have to do something different depending on where they're coming from. That's why we have to have different calls. We either call everybody out and say, everybody get to the trees, or we're calling out saying, everybody get to the foliage. That makes perfect sense. Okay, yeah, that's the answer. E, certain land-based predators feed, okay, certain, I don't know. Certain, so you're saying some don't? Certain land-based predators feed only on vervet monkeys. Okay, but some land-based predators don't. Whereas every predator that attacks vervet monkeys from the air feeds on many different animals. Yeah, but this is about animal preference. It's not saying why monkeys have to make different calls. They're both being attacked by predators, right? So that's not helpful. So yeah, our answer is D on this bad boy. What do we think? Was conflicted between C and D. No predators that pose a danger to vervet monkeys can attack both from land and the air. So this might rule out one possible explanation, like dual predators, right? Like they can do both. But it's not explaining why monkeys need to differentiate between the two, right? That's the thing to think about. Just because one predator, and we already have it in the evidence that whether a predator is coming from the land or the air, that's what the determining factor. So the fact that no predator does both, it's irrelevant because even if predators do both, let's just say, I don't know, what flies and runs at the same time. I don't know. I can't think of something, but I don't know. There's an animal that can do both somehow, right? They can come in and fly in, or they can chase them on the land. The fact is, whether they're coming from the air or they're coming from the land, that's going to decide how they call, not who's coming, right? C's talking about who's coming, not how they're coming. And their behavior is based on how they're being attacked, right? And so that would be the big difference for me between C and D. Hopefully that's helpful. Yeah. All right. We good on this one then? Yeah. Solid. All right. Yeah, these are pretty easy. Well, oh wait. We need our points. Yeah, we didn't. Citizen Volunteers of America. We gotta get paid for our work. All right. There we go. All right. Section 4. 122, 4, 22. Economist. At least one person argues that when large countries split into several small countries, okay, the world economy is harmed. How? By increased barriers to free trade in the form of increased number of national tariffs. Wait, at least one person out there argues when you take a big country and turn it into small countries, the world economy is harmed by increased barriers to free trade through the number of national tariffs. Okay. But small countries do not think of themselves as economically self-sufficient. Therefore, such division of large countries does not increase barriers to free trade. Wait, what? Hold on. So the author believes that splitting large countries into smaller ones doesn't increase trade barriers because small countries don't view themselves as self-sufficient? Okay, well, but that's counter to the other argument. So you're assuming then right away that not viewing yourself as self-sufficient means they're not going to impose the trade barriers that the other argument thinks they're going to impose. The only evidence here tells us about mindset of small countries, not their actual policies. So the author's assuming here that there's a link that small countries won't raise tariffs because they don't see themselves as self-sufficient. So they're saying that self-sufficient is needed for these tariffs, right? So only countries that see themselves as self-sufficient are going to impose trade barriers like tariffs. Yeah, if those things weren't true, this argument falls apart. So that's what we're looking at here. Yeah. Yeah. What's your question, James? What's the link between tariffs and self-sufficiency? Oh, the argument's thinking that the only way, the only people that's making tariffs that like impose tariffs are people that think are countries that think they're self-sufficient, regardless of size. They're saying that, hey, if they don't think they're self-sufficient, they're not going to put tariffs out there. Why do you think that? Well, that's why these small countries aren't going to put the tariffs. That's why this other thing's wrong, because they're not going to put the tariffs because they don't think they're self-sufficient. Oh, so you think that they have to think they're self-sufficient, right? When you reframe the argument back, it just kind of makes it more clear, right? You can see where they're like jumping from one point to another because it just won't be smooth. You won't see a connection all the way through. You're gonna go, wait, how are you getting from these people aren't going to do the thing, they're not going to do tariffs because they're not self-sufficient? Oh, so you think in order to do tariffs, you must be self-sufficient. Oh, okay. Right. And then it just makes the connection. So hopefully that's helpful. What are we going to do with that? Which one of the following, if assumed, enables the economies to go? Oh, okay. Well, small countries don't think they're self-sufficient, and that's why they want to pray. We got to bridge the gap between these small countries don't think they're self-sufficient. That's why they want to impose trade barriers. So this is where I'm going to go right back to the necessary assumption. Only countries that think they're self-sufficient impose trade barriers. Or if a country doesn't view itself as self-sufficient, it doesn't impose trade barriers, right? That's it. I'm going right back to the next necessary assumption. I'm going to find evidence that proves that true. And we win. Simple. Super simple. There we go. A, a country has the right to split into small, I don't care, irrelevant. B, increasing the number of countries in the world would no, strengthen how? Strengthen rather than weak? Nope, I'm out. C, all countries that impose national tariffs or other barriers to free trade better think themselves as self-sufficient. Think of themselves as economic. That's it. We win. C is the answer. D, there's strong evidence that national tariffs and other barriers to free trade harm the world economy. Okay, great background info, but this doesn't help in the economist's case that it's the self-sufficient versus that gets us to the tariffs. E, large countries tend to be more economic, so some aren't. Again, there's the back door. There's the back door. Tend to, that doesn't help. That just means most of the time, which also means some of the time it's not, right? So that's not it. C is the answer here. What do we think? Are we good? All right, let's get our points here real quick. We win. Awesome. Any questions about any of the questions that we did that I didn't cover, or any strategies I was doing that didn't make sense? Is there anything about what we covered today that I can help with? I'll stay after for a bit and answer non-related questions. Was there anything about what we went over today that we need to talk about? No? I got one in the chat. So I said, I know C is correct, but other barriers confuse me a little here. Explain the difference between, explain, because how do we know about other barriers? Other barriers are irrelevant to the argument. Great question. Other barriers are irrelevant because the author was trying to connect something very specific, right? They were trying to connect that, hey, they're only going to impose the tariffs if they believe they're self-sufficient. And we can see that when we repeat the argument and see what exactly the author was trying to say. And when we isolate the conclusion, other barriers are irrelevant. So something talking about all countries impose national tariffs or other barriers. Okay, well, I don't need other barriers. I only need the national tariffs, but thanks for adding, right? And to free trade, think themselves as economically self-sufficient, right? Hopefully that's helpful. Always helpful. All right. Well, if that's it, I appreciate you guys coming. Oh, wait, we got a couple in the chat. Make sure. Nope. Okay. So if there's nothing else, thank you guys for coming. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said in the very, very beginning. Scanning, skimming, and even extensive reading is not the type of reading we need to do on the LSAT. The LSAT is all about critical, precise, intensive reading. We can never leave a word behind. Yes, it's going to be slow in the beginning, but the better you get at it, the faster you get at it. And the faster you get at it, the more skill, you're more skilled, you're more confident, right? So first we do it right, then we do it fast. And if you focus on getting that skill built, you will destroy this test. This test is there for anybody willing to work on that critical, precise reading. You will win. You'll win. All right. Hope to see you guys next time. Thank you very much for coming. Awesome. Hey, Prabani, how are you?
Hi, doing good. How are you?